You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, we're back, and David Pepper, the author, the activist, the patriot, the former state Democratic chair in Ohio, the founder of Blue Ohio, and the proponent of running everywhere, is back. Hi, David. Thanks for spending some of your Labor Day weekend with us.
Thanks. Great to be with you again.
Hey, for those of us interested in learning how to fight for democracy, boy, Ohio is the gift that keeps on giving. I mean, after this massive effort by scores of groups, including yours, the people of the state dealt the autocrats in charge a big loss last month, right? But despite all the cynical tricks, including holding an illegal election in August, you showed them what it meant. But now they're back at it. Talk about, to let everybody know what's going on.
And so this is never lose your outrage about it because we don't want to normalize it. But also never be surprised because this is what they do. The more in the corner they are, the worse they act. They don't quit, they double down. And so what happened, I think you're alluding to, what happened was, so the whole reason they tried to end direct democracy here is because we have a ballot initiative in November about a woman's right to choose and enshrining abortion access into the Ohio Constitution. They know it's popular. That's why they try to change the rules in August. Well, they lost, obviously. So now they're even more worried it's going to pass. So what do? There's something called the ballot board in Ohio. And the ballot board is the institution that takes the amendment language and provides a summary of how it should appear on the ballot. And that's basically there in case the language is really long. And you shorten it so that voters can see a summary of it without reading the whole thing. Well, in this case, the amendment itself was actually very short. So they didn't even need to do anything. But what they've done is their quote-unquote summary, believe it or not, and this is where you know the trouble's coming, is longer than the amendment itself. So they didn't reduce it, which is what they're supposed to do. They made it longer. And in making it longer, they changed a lot of the language so that now this language doesn't have legal effect, but it's clearly to sway voters. So they replaced the word fetus, which was referred to once, by referring 4 times to unborn child. They took what was in the amendment itself. It says that every Ohioan should have a right to decisions over treatment, over miscarriage care or fertility or abortion. Well, they got rid of all those options and just said they have a right to treatment as opposed to decision. So it makes it look like the government's guaranteeing some kind of treatment, which is not what it is. And then the other biggie is the entire description was that it's a citizen's right that the state shall not infringe on. Well, they reversed that to say the citizens are going to be the one that are infringed on by this amendment. So the whole thing is clearly like George Orwell would be embarrassed by this. It's such an over-the-top re-description. And they made it longer. Why? Because they weren't trying to summarize it. They were trying to load it up with propaganda so that people vote no on it. I mean, that's clearly what's going on.
And am I right that they also, like the entire battle in August, everybody was told to vote no. Mm-hmm. Right? And now they
no on issue 1. Yeah, now it's yes on issue 1. They'll say, well, it had to be. They could have had it be a different number. Obviously, they don't mind that it's now the opposite vote. But so in every way, basically, this is a group of people who, as I've been trying to say for a couple of years, and more people are saying it, they just don't want the democratic process to play out. They're afraid because they know they're in the minority. So whether it's trying to change the rules in August, which they failed to do, or now put language on the ballot that's totally misleading, that in some ways reverses the whole point of it, so that people will read it and think, well, I'm voting no on that. I don't want citizens' rights infringed. Well, this isn't infringing on citizens' rights. It's infringing on the state's right to impose on citizens. But they are literally sitting there. And again, people are going to ask, what do we do about it? Well, this will go to the Ohio Supreme Court, the same Supreme Court that allowed them to have an election that violated the Ohio Revised Code. So I hope the court says this is absolutely abuse of power, which it clearly is. But I don't count on that. So my bottom line, just like issue 1 in August, It's just the people are going to have to see through it. We're going to have to make sure everyone knows before they even show up what this is really about, and then have people vote yes. And it's easier said than done. I don't think this sinks it. I don't think people should leave this interview and think, oh, gosh, it's doomed. I think we should still win. But I think it is, again, an eye-opener as to how far they'll go to break the rules, to abuse a power they were given to simply summarize something, and now they've rewritten it to favor their viewpoint. It just shows you that they are about using power to lock in a minority worldview, and they'll do whatever it takes to get it done.
Yeah, I guess we're a couple years into this, and we have not yet found where they think their bottom is. This in Ohio is shocking and terrible, but you have guys in Texas saying, you know what, we're not going to let women leave the state.
Right.
If they're pregnant. Speaking
There's
of
they're in a right-wing bubble. They're in gerrymandered districts where the only thing they worry about is the further right. So, I mean, I don't know what the bottom is for them. And I just think we need to know this is how they operate. This is what they do. And when we gear up for our fight, we need to always know that. And the idea that, and I warned after Wisconsin won the Supreme Court race in April, they're not going to just stop and acknowledge and allow that to happen. They're going to do whatever they can to cause trouble there. Just like when we won our Supreme Court win, which we did in November of 20, we had the same victory that Wisconsin had. They simply ignored the court for 2 years, threatened to impeach the Chief Justice, and they got away with it. So just know going in that this is a group of people that's largely living in a lawless, unaccountable world where they also because of gerrymandered districts, and know going in that that's how they're going to behave. And the other one that you would go ahead. Sorry.
There are just 2 points that you made that I want to flesh out a little. One is on their lawlessness. And we see that in Alabama today, where they're doing what you did, what Ohio did, by ignoring, in this case, the Supreme Court on gerrymandered districts, completely ignoring the law. So they are lawless. So one of the things that we need to tell people is, do you care about the rule of law in America? Do you do you just want to live in a country that you do what the people in power tell you to do? There are plenty of countries like that in the world. There always have been. That was sort of one. The other, though, is you're right. They didn't take the Wisconsin Supreme Court victory easily. Now that they're thinking about impeaching the woman who won, but there's a backlash to this, and you've done such a good job of giving people who are uncomfortable with the increasingly bizarre, cruel, illegal things the right wing is doing, of giving them a ramp on which they can get on to participate.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's what the good news is. And this is why I think the more plain spoken we all are about what they're doing, and I try to be. I don't mince words like I might have 5 or 6 years ago. The more clear it is, I think over time they're losing the political game by looking so crazy. There's a reason why every swing state election denying Secretary of State candidate lost last November. It was just too much for people. Kerry Lake and that Pennsylvania governor candidate who lost, and then the Secretary of State candidates, all of them looked too much, too lawless, especially for positions like Secretary of State, which everyone knows is running elections. Then you make the connection to what they will do with their lawlessness, which is things like dogs, things like chasing women down across their state. You can't even travel, or if they go out of state. I mean, you connect the lawlessness and the anti-democracy sort of instinct to real-world results, like the kind of nightmarish scenarios you get post-Dobbs really quickly. And all of a sudden, American people just say no. And that's what happened on August 8th. And I can't remember if we've talked since then or not, but the map that came out of August 8th, the map where Ohioans voted no, was a stunning map. It wasn't just blue areas showing up in big numbers in a special as big as almost a midterm. It was Tea Party-like rural counties also voting no. And then it was sort of large suburban Republican counties, either going 50-50 or voting no. Now, again, this is 24 out of 88. I don't overstate it. But when you see them losing in counties that when I campaigned in, I was prepared to be talking to Tea Party members.
Yeah.
There's a sense of lawlessness that cut through there where you heard people say, and there's some chunk of these voters, and I respect this response, although I don't agree with them on their vote in November. People would say, well, I'm not voting yes on issue 1 November or the abortion access issue in November, but I don't think this is the way we should get there, so I'm voting no in August.
Yeah.
So there was a sense of the lawlessness, and I think you're speaking to that in your question. That lawlessness is getting so egregious. The same reason that gerrymandering offends people. It's cheating. It's rigging. Now, some people will still go along the party line and say, okay, I'm going to do what the party says. But in August, on August 8th in Ohio, a lot of Republicans and a whole lot of independents showed up and looked at their party's endorsement and saw people like Mike DeWine saying vote yes, and they said, I'm not voting yes. This is cheating. This is wrong, and they voted no. And it wouldn't have been no votes in a lot of the counties where they voted no if a pretty decent chunk of Republican voters hadn't have also said, no, this is too much. And I think the thing about this in my little Substack I put out there, I think that map that's not the map that Sherrod Brown is going to win with, and I think he'll win. That's not the map that he's going to win with, but that's a map that shows you that when it comes to up or down votes on democracy itself or gerrymandering or other efforts to do what they're doing, that there's actually a multi-party coalition that can be put together that says no to this stuff. And that was what was so encouraging about August. That's the exact coalition of people that is offended when they see people, messing with the wording of an amendment or breaking the law to do X, Y, and Z. And I do think there's more than just Democrats that at some point are offended, but that's not a majority of Republicans probably. But there's enough of them that you end up having a decisive result like we had last month.
Yeah, it was fabulous. I think we're over a different hump too, and this is a related to the media kind of hump. But for way too long, for people who've been paying attention, the news has been dominated every day by some outrage of Donald Trump's or of his, the MAGA crowd. I think the country now knows who they are, right? And we don't have to spend all our time proving that they are who we think they are. They've told us, and I think people know it. And that puts us in a different place because now we can talk about what we're going to do about it.
Right. And what's funny is along those lines, I was speaking in a pretty Republican county. It's swing, but Republican. It's called Portage County, where Kent State is. Okay, it's because the university it's got some Democrats there, but this is a county that largely votes red. And when I was speaking, and this was the 3 days before the August 8th election, we had this great rally, and some guy came and started interrupting. So angry, yelling, screaming. And it was this confrontation for a few minutes. And it was like you said, okay, he's a MAGA guy. And we a couple of the people who were against issue 1 of the crowd kind of got in his way. He finally walked away, screaming, sputtering, mad. And it was really memorable how mad he was that all of us were simply saying we think we should be a majority rule state. But like you said, we also kind of used to it. And you know what's funny? That county voted no. So all his anger and all his spazzing, he didn't reflect the majority of his own county with all that anger. And the point is, okay. And as I said because I had the microphone, I said, sure, you can say what you think. We just think, and if 50% plus one of people think your way, then we think you should get your way, but not what you're. And what was funny was later on, I thought that's funny. That guy was so angry in his own county voted against him. So, they're out there. We know they're out there, but keep plugging forward, keep moving forward, keep explaining what's happening. And I think when the question is called, if it's called clearly, and if we have a fair playing field where people get to vote, I think this is my broader point, their extremism does not do well on Election Day. That's why we've actually had a lot of counter-cyclical wins in the last year and a half. We're supposed to be losing most elections when we have the White House. That's how it's worked for decades. But we're winning the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, our August issue, the Kansas referendum. Their extremism is not good politics. And so if they keep it up and they don't change and we see through and fight through the obstacles they're trying to put up, I actually think that, as I say, next year is not just an opportunity to re-elect Joe Biden, but it's an opportunity to run everywhere and to start winning in places that we often aren't winning. Yes, it can be. Yeah. Only though if we're smart enough. We don't realign by simply beating Trump. We realign by running at all levels and starting to win in places where they've been extremists for too long, but haven't been challenged in all those places for too long.
Yeah, I mean, a radical activist Supreme Court is helping us too, by virtue of just being so out of touch on issues that Americans care about. So let me not talk about current politics for 1 second, because you're the only person I know besides me who has been haunted by ghosts from the 1870s.
Oh, gosh,
every once in a while, I have a historian on this show, and we talk about Reconstruction, the Opelousas and Colfax massacres, and the determination of the Southern power structure to hold on even after the Civil War. You've been lately back in that world talking about the rise of Jim Crow, and you're such a good writer that you sort of make these things, these stories resonate. And I wonder if you just talk about why you're focused on that time and why it's relevant.
Well, the reason it comes up when it does for me is I teach this course on it. And so every year I teach it, I re-review my thoughts, my cases. And just like we can't stop being outraged about what we're dealing with now, we should never, and this is why the censorship is so dangerous, we should never not be outraged by what happened after the rise of a diverse democracy, after the Civil War, and then the absolute destruction of it through violence, intimidation, and all sorts of just horrible politics that took, and I go through this in some of what you're talking about. You had a majority, you had more black voters than white voters in Louisiana in the 1870s. 30 years later, 128,000 black Louisiana voters was down to 700. Similar wipeouts in other states, 50,000, 80,000 voters down to 3,000 in states like Mississippi and South Carolina. And it's just so brutal. And it's so painful. And one thing I try and do is not just go through the numbers, but think through, because we like to have, and I don't do this to be negative. I do it to make sure we all are eyes wide open that democracy can be attacked successfully. That's what happened. And I think about the lives of a young black man, let's say, born in the 1860s, teenager in the 1870s. And let's say he was in Louisiana or one of these other states. As he looked around, as tough as I'm sure life was, and as much discrimination as he faced, all around him, he would have seen black elected officials. He would have seen 60% turnout in a presidential election of black voters. He would have seen a black Supreme Court justice, either in his state or another state, a member of Congress, a black member of Congress in the South every year for 40 years. And when that young man reached the age of 40 or 50, because of everything I've described, all of that would be gone. I mean, literally no officials left, nobody voting. Election day just went by and black voters weren't part of it because they were knocked off the rolls or killed or hurt because of it. And I just try and think about what those – I think it gets more real when you try and think about what life looked like. And then think about this man one more time. 80 or 90 years old, maybe he lives to see Jackie Robinson play baseball. And as Jackie Robinson plays baseball and all the younger generations are celebrating, what's he thinking about? He's thinking about when he was 8. He had elected officials who were black mayors and, again, state house members. And so he's probably excited about Jackie Robinson, but it's also probably a reminder of what the old world had looked like that he lost. And so I go through all that because I really think that I was a history major, and I never really saw or learned that. And I think one reason we have sort of let our guard down in recent decades on democracy is we've come to believe that it's just there to stay no matter what. It's sort of part of who we are. And the lesson of the era that you and I are clearly both obsessed with is that's not true. If there is a group that is consistently and effectively attacking democracy, and those who care about it don't fight back hard, constantly, the side attacking democracy can win. And lives can be upended because of it. And that's why I try and here's the worst part in some ways. So many of the tools and so much of the narrative that led to what they did in the 1870s was about voter fraud and myths of voter fraud, that these new black elected officials were somehow corrupt, as if and the white ones were all magically good, and that's why they needed to suppress the vote. That's why they added all these tests. And what do we hear today? All the same nonsense. It's the same narrative that they are using now with new strict voter IDs and new this and new that and purging and gerrymandering. It's the same stuff, and it's coming right back. And one reason why those who are censoring history do so, I think, is to not allow anyone to see that this has all happened before, and it's actually worked before. So we better know that history, and we better fight very, very hard not to let it get repeated.
Yeah, I am like you. I'm haunted by this, and I am determined that unlike the white folks in the North in the 1870s who said, you know what, I want to get on with my life, I'm not going to pay any attention, and let this lawlessness. I mean, remember, we had the 14th Amendment, we had the 13th Amendment, we had 15th Amendment, we had the laws were ignored by these people, which is and when we let them ignore them, which is why today when Alabama says, yeah, we don't care what the Supreme Court said, we're going to ignore the law, it rings every alarm bell.
It does. It does. I went through the case actually last week. Maybe it was last week. There was a case out of Oklahoma where, I don't know if you saw this, but they had this grandfather clause where basically if your grandfather was able to vote in 1865 in Oklahoma, then if you were in 1910 in Oklahoma, you got to vote too, and you didn't have to take a literacy test. Yeah. But if your grandfather couldn't vote then you had to. Basically, if you're black, you have to take the test and you're going to fail. If you're white, you get to skip it.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Court struck that down. Good for them. In 1915, the Supreme Court of the United States said, that's discrimination. We're not going to allow it. A very rare victory for voting rights champions in 1915. Well, the State House, literally within months, just like Alabama just did, the State House of Oklahoma, within months, passed a new law that said, hey, any one of you who was grandfathered in before, don't worry, you're all still registered. And any of you who wasn't, you have 12 days in a certain period in 1916 to register, and you're fine. And if you don't, you can't vote for the rest of your life, okay? So it was clearly just outrageous repeating of the grandfather clause. And the Supreme Court struck that down. But you know when they struck it down? 1939. Yeah. So the defiance of the court ruling led to 24 more years of injustice. And so that was one of the tools of Jim Crow South legislatures back then. You just ignored the court orders, or you made a tiny change that you knew would still have the same effect. And that is exactly what Ohio got away with last year. And that's exactly what that sort of got away with when they delayed things with that Moore v. Harper case, and now they have a front of the Supreme Court. And that's exactly what Alabama is trying to do right now by basically sending back a map that still has only one district that's majority-minority when there clearly should be two, as the Supreme Court ruled. So, yeah, it's the same pattern. They are behaving the same way as the worst of our country's history 100 years ago.
So this is why the work that you're doing at Blue Ohio, but also you're exporting it around the country, telling people they have to take this fight everywhere. They can't just get bigger majorities out of Chicago, right? Or out of Cleveland, if there's still voters left there. They really have to go and talk to neighbors. This is Labor Day, right? Labor celebrates a movement.
Right.
I had a guest on earlier. I think you would have loved this. Michael Waldman was on, and he wrote a great book about the Supreme Court, but he also runs the Brennan Center. And he really said, Democrats have focused on rights almost exclusively. And there's nothing wrong with rights, but the Democrats used to focus on something else more. And that was social progress and social justice and economic justice, and creating the movements that would bring people up together. And rights were part of it. But I think we outsourced the hard political work to the lawyers and said, just do the rights work, we'll be fine. And what you're doing every day is saying, no. We need to do the hard political work that focuses on the outcomes again.
Absolutely. And, it's funny, you just mentioned, I just went biking earlier today. I was in a pretty red county, and there was a big sign around the weekend, Proud Union Home. And I just said, good. And I think about that with these counties that, again, voted no, because we went out there. These just to give credit where credit's due, these county parties, the Democratic parties in these counties red counties worked really hard to get some of those results, because they was such a clear threat to democracy that people are really, fighting hard. And I think we do have to go out there. And one way I'll put this sort of in a way that's sobering, and of course I don't say this to minimize the need to defeat Donald Trump. Obviously, we cannot let him win. But if all we do, my theory is that the heart of their agenda, the heart of the right-wing extreme agenda, is basically running through red districts of Republican state houses that we generally don't even oppose. So 50% of Tennessee Republicans unopposed, 60% of Oklahoma, 42% of Texas, you name it, 42% of Georgia. That's where they're doing all their damage. And if all we do is, and their damage is working. I mean, I think of it, they're on offense, kicking at the goal. They're scoring again and again and again. We're not even playing defense against the player shooting the goals. Okay, we're just not even there. If Biden wins, and if we win the Senate, but we haven't started taking on those shots, none of that stops. So winning the federal is necessary, but not sufficient to stop what they're doing. And what happened after 20 was, yes, we beat Trump, and we needed to beat Trump. But when we didn't pick up a single state house, and we still left unchallenged in 22, half of their crazy people that are doing all these things, we're not making progress against what they're doing. Especially if we're in power like we were in 2022, we don't even have to check to protect ourselves. So we have to see that only winning at the level that we largely focus on, Biden versus Trump, of course it's needed, but it's not enough anymore. We have to get into the spaces where they are, challenge their extremism where it's happening. And by the way, there was a story, I can't remember, I'm forgetting what county this was in, just a few days ago. And it's a great example. A true sort of very election-denying county commissioner who was appointed in a very Republican area lost to a Democrat for the same reason those election-denying Secretary of State candidates lost. The person was too nuts. You'll never get those wins if you're not running in these places. This was a total shock. And so if we want to interrupt their attack on democracy, only beating Trump is not enough. We have to get to where they are sort of leading their charge, which is these right-leaning districts in state houses that we too often don't pay any attention to. And we win the federal seats, and we think we won it all, and they keep right on doing what they're doing because we're not winning. We're not even playing defense where they're on offense.
Yeah, and the real effect of this is that we can't make people's lives better while they're doing this in states. And there are people all over the country who deserve better than the grift they're getting.
Absolutely. And Tony, I'm about to do this for Labor Day. You show me a gerrymandered state, and I will show you, and this, I think your previous question as well, I will show you unacceptably terrible public outcomes. Stagnant wages, schools not supported, falling apart. Ohio was ranked 5th in the quality of our public schools 20 years ago. Now we're in the mid-20s. Infrastructure, small towns collapsing. Health outcomes terrible. Once you have a gerrymandered state house where the people of the state are not sort of, in the end, the people of the state house politicians care about because they're reelected no matter what. They're running without opposition half the time. Once you have that lack of accountability back to the people, their motivation isn't really about public service anymore. It's a corrupted form of service. Their service is essentially, and I tweeted about this the other day, and all people around the country said, wow, that sounds like my state. Their motivation is basically take public goods, take public assets, and fork them over to the private players who keep us in power. Give the public school money to the private for-profit school companies. Give the public money to the energy companies a bailout. Give the payday lenders what they want. Have the citizens pay for it. On and on again. If you watch these state houses closely, they essentially they're not public service. They're the opposite. They're using public goods to serve certain private players.
Privatized gains, socialized losses.
Right. And by diverting the public money from its purpose, the public outcomes are cratering. And that's why to me, the best campaigns right now in these areas aren't talking about the democracy stuff, although you could talk about it to some degree, but it's tying back the lack of democracy to the results that everyday people feel, like 4 days of school a week in some states, or higher taxes because they've taken the state money and given it somewhere else. Or in Ohio, we have the worst student debt burden in the nation in the state of Ohio because they're underfunding it, so it's made up through tuition and student debt. So there are so many ways you could connect back, and that's how you start to do better in these elections when, as you said, make it about democracy is a backdrop, but then show people that lack of a functioning democracy with no accountability to people is really affecting everyday issues they care about. And that's why you have, I think, a Democratic governor in Kansas for 2 terms. She made it all about Sam Brownback destroying public schools.
Yeah. Hey, the other side of that argument is a beautiful thing, which is that democracy works. I mean, now you see where you erode the democracy, life gets worse for people, which is just a fabulous argument that if people are participating and they are part of the civic political life, then there are better economic outcomes for everybody. And it almost explains, really, besides race, why the power structure that was there in the South and that is gerrymandered there in Ohio, why they do not want democracy. Because, then you end up having to share.
Yeah, I mean, if you feel accountable to the public because you have, let's say, fair districts and fair elections, you have a motivation to improve public outcomes. So you're going to do things like lift schools because that's how you get reelected, or lift wages, or broaden health care. But if you have no connection back to the people and you literally are reelected or reappointed because you have no opposition time and again, your entire motivation there is no longer about public service. It doesn't really matter if the outcomes are as bad as they are in states like Ohio or Iowa or Tennessee. So yeah, you want a political system that aligns with lifting public outcomes. And what we have in these broken states is there is a total disconnect between public outcomes and getting reelected. And the bigger connection now is those politicians do better by serving the private interests that want the public pie for them. And that's why we see these nonstop. Ohio, again, the biggest donor to the Republican Party for a number of years in a row was a massive for-profit private school scam. And this is the irony. Republicans now rail on the couple years, or it wasn't even a couple years, but on the time that the kids were home from school on their computers because of COVID. For almost a decade, that was the main driving education policy of Ohio Republicans, because their biggest donor was running a virtual school at home. Yeah. And so now they're saying we didn't like it during COVID. They sent kids home. The school was almost as big as Ohio State University for years, and this guy made thousands of dollars every time a student left a public school and signed on to his computers at home. And it turns out, we found out later, these kids' educations were destroyed. It took money out of all the public schools. But again, that is a perfect example. Their MO was the public school money was the piggy bank for them to enrich their big private donor, and that's exactly what they did. And even when they knew it was a failure and the public outcomes were terrible, they kept doing it because, again, their motivation is more about that private school operator than it is the broader public outcomes. And even if parents back in their districts figure out what they're doing, well, they get reelected no matter what, so they don't care. It's a perfect symbol of how they're operating.
Hey, David, it's worth saying, because you and I are very invested in the Democratic Party and its values. But in fairness, I live in Illinois. The chief of staff of the former House Speaker was just convicted the last week. Democrats can be guilty of the same crimes. And the points that you're making are enormously important and valid and not partisan. And I just don't want people to think of us as, look, it's all one side, it's never the other side. The country's got to understand that after Obama got shellacked in midterms, when Republicans gerrymandered, they did so with perfected technology for gerrymandering, and they built a majority that no one's ever seen before, and then they defended it with every rotten trick in the book. it has nothing to do with partisan. It has to do with just this is the moment we're in.
I agree. This comes up a lot for me. I mean, intense gerrymandering is going to lead to the results. If you have a system with no accountability, it will lead to bad results no matter what. And that's why I'm a big believer in, people ask me all the time, again, there's far more worse Republican gerrymandering now than Democratic gerrymandering. And when Republican gerrymanderers have been caught doing like in Ohio, they ignored the law in the rulings. The New York Democrats, when they got caught gerrymandering, actually followed the law, and that's one reason you saw George Santos and others get elected. So there was a moment of lawlessness we saw on the Republican side where they got caught and they basically went along with the ruling. So there's not a both sides. But, if you have a highly gerrymandered system where politicians feel no accountability, you're going to have maybe a different type of problem, but you're going to have poor governance. I completely agree. This is the other reason why I think the best solution here, although I want to gerrymandering in Ohio, is if the U.S. Senate, and the next time we have the House, pass a law that says no one do it anywhere. Because once you want one standard, because the other thing that's happening right now is, if no one has a standard, then you have a race to the bottom. New York State thinks that Ohio is going to gerrymander, so if they don't gerrymander, they'll lose. And so the best result would be if you had finally Washington say, we're going to write rules that no one can gerrymander. And this is going to be partisan for a second. And last time that came up, Democrats supported it, Republicans didn't. But you had 50 Democratic votes. Now, Sinema and Manchin wouldn't go along with stopping filibuster, and no Republicans would support that. But I think that in the end, gerrymandering, lack of accountability, will breed corruption and will breed poor public performance no matter what. And I agree with that. But Democrats are more intense about solving it if you look closely than Republicans. And I hope Republicans figure out. And by the way, the other thing that's interesting here is gerrymandering is also not partisan in another way. In states like Ohio, gerrymandering has actually attacked and neutralized a whole lot of Republicans. This is extremist gerrymandering at the expense of moderate Republicans. And the reason they draw districts that are so one-sided is they don't want to have close districts where a moderate Republican says to his more extremist caucus leader, hey, I'm not going along with that. I will lose. So in many ways, if you're listening, if you're an old moderate Republican, like let's say like my dad is, gerrymandering has been used by the far right of a party to get rid of the more centrist part of that party. And that's happening right now in Ohio, right? I was just tweeting with a state rep in the last hour. He's all excited. This guy, I don't know him very well, but he believes that they're going to use gerrymandering, another round of it, to get rid of all the moderate Republicans that worked with Democrats in the last session. So this is a tool that isn't just about R versus D. It's about no accountability whatsoever for those in power. And it's about people far more extreme than their state who actually don't want voices of more mainstream Ohio, be it Democrats or Republicans, being in office to challenge them. I mean, that's really what it's about.
Yeah, it may destroy the Republican Party, and it may already have, because those more moderate, those right of center, but not crazy Republicans, they don't have a home right now.
No, and they're the ones in Ohio 3 weeks ago. They're the ones who teamed up with Democrats, and who was included in them? John Kasich, Bob Taft. Yeah. They voted no. They led the charge. The former Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court, longtime Republican, former Attorney General Betty Montgomery, Republican. They are part of the group that gerrymandering has pushed away from their party. So that's why I think just broadly it's a problem no matter what. And I'm happy to say that. And some Republicans think I'm only saying one side here. But I do think Republicans have been much more aggressive lately with it. But I also think they're using it against their own as much as they're using it against Democrats in a lot of these states.
Yeah. Hey, David, we've run over, and I really appreciate your taking the extra time on this holiday weekend. It's really good. I love our conversations.
Yeah, I really appreciate you and I are on the same page on so much, and I love getting a chance to talk to you, all your listeners.
Yep. All right. Enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Okay. Take care. You too. See ya.
Yep. Folks, we're going to take a quick break, and then 773-763-9278 in the time remaining. I'd love to hear from you.